Now that we have learned more about the different styles of wine out there, we can move on to looking at some of the major grape varieties in more detail. In the next two subjects, we are going to examine 13 major grape varieties and the types of wines they make. We are going to learn about the climate they enjoy, the way they are handled in the cellar, and the typical flavors and aromas the wines made from these varieties have. This is a challenging task because, as we have already seen in this course, there are very few absolutes in wine. A winemaker in Argentina and a winemaker in South Africa might both grow and make wines from Sauvignon Blanc. The wines they produce will probably taste very different, but still taste of Sauvignon Blanc. There is no way we are going to be able to investigate every possible path a grape can take from vineyard to wine cellar to bottle, or to find every single flavor each variety can produce. Our job is to understand the general flavors and aromas of each variety, rather than the specifics you will find in different countries. To do this, there are a few generalizations we are going to make about the wine world, and it's useful to understand those before we dive into the 13 varieties we are going to cover. Let's start by understanding the difference between the Old and New World. The Old and New World describe the different areas in the world that produce wine. The Old World describes wine-producing countries in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. The New World describes countries that started making wine at a later time than the Old World. Countries such as the United States, Australia, South Africa, and Argentina are part of the New World. But when we are talking about Old World and New World wines, we are not always talking about where they are from, but the style in which they are made. We will learn more about the details of the winemaking techniques and styles associated with the Old World and New World as we learn about each variety. What is important to understand before we start is that a winemaker in the New World may choose to use Old World techniques or the other way around. So when someone describes a Sauvignon Blanc as Old World in style, it doesn't mean that it was necessarily made in Europe, but that the wine has been made in a certain way. The next generalization you need to know about before we start learning about different varieties is that we are, unless we say otherwise, describing good wines. Every single grape variety can be made into a terrible wine that might taste completely different to how we describe it. That's just the way wine is. We are going to focus on the positive characteristics of each variety and what the flavors of well-made examples are. But we'll be sure to point out how things taste when wines are made poorly. The last idea that will be important to understand before we move on to the varieties is the idea of marginal climate. A grapevine is a funny thing. For it to produce the best grapes, it needs only the very minimum of sunlight, water, and nutrients. Each vine variety is different, but if they are spoilt with too much food, water, and light, they might grow too quickly or produce far too many grapes. Can you remember what happens to the flavor of the grapes when this happens? They lack flavor, exactly. Well done. Some areas in the world have climates that are perfect for growing the best possible grapes of a certain variety. But because this perfection is so close to failure, some years the grapes might not ripen, or there will not be enough rain and the grapes are damaged. These are marginal climates. Not all great wines have to be produced in marginal climates, but that is often the case. What's important to remember is if we say that a Sauvignon Blanc needs a cool climate, we are talking about the best climate for Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc can grow in all sorts of climates, but that doesn't mean they're always going to be the best wines. Finally, remember that there are thousands of grape varieties out there. We have picked some of the most common and important varieties around, but for the rest of your wine-loving life there will always be another grape variety to try. As you watch these lessons, try to learn not just the specifics of these grapes, but the way in which we describe them. So if you come across a variety you haven't heard of before, You will know the best way to try and understand them.